Hello, everyone. This is the third lecture from Chapter 1, which is covering Section 4, Economic Insights. When we study economics, the first thing we want to try to do is create a theory. A theory is this framework for understanding a principle or a natural phenomenon, all right, or something that's going on in the economy. So essentially we want in a theory a way to explain and predict outcomes based on particular inputs. Oftentimes, though, the theories that we have are very abstract. They don't exactly work to explain everyday phenomenon. So we often use these theories in what we call an economic model. An economic model is a framework that places the generalized insight of a theory in a specific contextual setting. In other words, what we do with an economic model is we use that as a lens to understand how the world works. All right, so we can take different models and use those to understand specific parts of a particular system. For example, we could take an airplane. All right, we could make 3 different models of an airplane. We could make a photograph of the airplane. All right, and you say, well, that's not a model. Well, yeah, it is a kind of model. It's a model that demonstrates how the airplane looks. And from a photograph, we can see what an airplane looks like. It has wings, it has jets, it has a tail. All right, landing gears, all of that stuff we can see from the photograph. All right, another kind of model might be a paper airplane. We can fold the paper airplane up, and what does that do? Well, that flies. It doesn't look anything like a real airplane, but it flies like a real airplane. All right? Photograph looks like the airplane, but doesn't fly. Paper airplane flies like the real airplane, but doesn't look like it. A third model might be a schematic drawing of the airplane, which gives us instructions on how to build it. Well, that neither looks like the airplane nor does it fly like the airplane, but it does tell us all about the inner workings of the airplane and how to put it together. Each one of those is a valid model that demonstrates a particular aspect of the actual thing from the real world, namely the airplane, that we're trying to understand. So we use these models in economics as tools to understand specific aspects of the economy. Well, to do that, we have to make simplifying assumptions, and those simplifying assumptions really make it specific to the setting that we're looking at. An economic principle is a commonly held insight stated as a law or general assumption. For example, one that we may talk about later is Oken's law, or rather Oken's empirical regularity, which basically relates unemployment and output, right? So where we are in the business cycle to how much unemployment we have, right? We'll talk about that later, but that's an example of one of these principles. So theories, models, and principles are continually tested to see if predictions in the model match the data. In fact, that's one of the things I do in my own research, is take these models to the data and see, do we get the right results? So models lead to theorems. Well, a proposition that are logically true based on assumptions of the model. So a theorem is just like a theorem in math. All right, we have an assumption. Based on that assumption, we have a statement. That statement then has a proof. To arrive at precepts, policy rules that conclude that a particular course of action is preferable. So we will use these models that lead to our theorems, that lead to our basic understanding of how the economy works, to come up with policy that helps us do everything from, say, regulate the financial markets to determine how much we should charge for a turnpike. These theorems must be combined with knowledge of real-world economic institutions and value judgments to determine economic goals for society. One of the issues that we have in economics is that it's a fairly young science, and as a result, we don't know everything yet. So while we have really, really easy to use fairly simple rules in, say, physics, that govern how systems work. We know pretty well exactly how to calculate, how fast an object is going to be falling if we drop it from a height, and other things in physics that we know how to do. In economics, we don't always know how to do that as well. And so sometimes where our knowledge lacks off, we have to start making value judgments to determine, well, how exactly do we best get to where we want to go? So one of these ideas, one of these precepts that we have, especially in Western thought, particularly American thought, is this idea of the invisible hand. Well, according to the invisible hand, a market economy, through the price mechanism, allocates resources efficiently. And by efficiently, what do I mean? I mean that we have the right amount of stuff being produced as cheaply as possible. All right, so it's not just as cheaply as possible, but also the right amount. Well, how does that work? Well, prices fall when the quantity supplied is greater than quantity demanded. So if we supply too much, price falls. That punishes the seller, and the seller wants to sell less, and so we produce less, and so we will ultimately reduce our production down to the right amount. Prices rise when quantity demanded is greater than quantity supplied. So if we don't produce enough, then eventually the price rises, which rewards those who are producing. So more people want to produce, and so we end up producing a little bit more until we go up and down, up and down, up and down, until we hit exactly the right amount, which is what we call the efficient allocation. Or in this case, efficiently means achieving a goal as cheaply as possible. Well, let's add to that achieving the right goal as cheaply as possible. So in other words, we produce the right amount of stuff for the lowest cost that we possibly can. And that's what we think we get with the invisible hand. Usually. Not always, but for the most part. So we divide all of these theories and models up into two big parts. All right, part number one is microeconomics, and you may have taken that already this summer, but that's not this class. We're teaching macro. We're learning macro this particular 4 weeks. But microeconomics is the study of individual choice and how that choice is influenced by economic forces. In other words, we're studying individual economic units, individual people, individual firms. We could even look at individual governments. That's getting a little bit into macro, but it's the individual unit that we're looking at with microeconomics. Macroeconomics is the study of the economy as a whole. All right, so what we're going to study in this course is how overall the economy works. So microeconomics studies such things as the pricing policy of firms, so what to charge, household decisions on what to buy, how markets allocate resources among alternative ends. All right, so individual markets. Macroeconomics studies things such as inflation, unemployment, economic growth, other macroeconomic policy, such as fiscal policy, how the government spends and taxes and borrows, or monetary policy. So do we increase the money supply, have expansionary monetary policy, or we decrease the money supply, contractionary monetary policy? All right, so we'll cover all of that in later chapters. But the basic idea is micro individual units, macro economy as a whole.